I know that Dr. Plucker has to go. He has a hard stop. And we're so grateful to have you addressing the committee and sharing your expertise with us. I think the committee is very familiar, but just as a recap, Dr. Jonathan Plucker is the president of the National Association for Gifted Children, is recognized as a education specialist nationally for his insights, and is on the faculty at Johns Hopkins. And so we're really excited because we struggle on this committee, like a lot of districts, with how do we make sure that gifted education is equitable, that gifted children are receiving the services that they need, and that we're doing a good job at identifying all of the students that require those services. And we're struggling in our district. And so the committee now, but as our many districts, I will say, we have been able to share our indicators report, which is basically the stats of the district. So he has had some insight into what our actual numbers are and some of the challenges that we have. And I know several of you also have had an opportunity to hear him speak when he spoke on the panel we had last January, I believe it was, about the vision for our new high school. So we're so thankful that you're giving us your time and your expertise, and we look forward to hearing what you can share with us about, achieving equity in gifted education. So thank you.
Yeah, no, I'm very happy to be here, and just realized that my lighting is horrible, but my wife is meeting with some students online, and as a K-12 teacher, if we have a conflict, she gets the fancy lights. So you're gonna have to look at a blurry me. I apologize, but how do you want to do this, Laura? You just want me to jump into these questions that you sent me, and it's totally up to you. You're on mute.
I think that would be a good starting point, because they're pretty broad topics that will lead towards a lot of discussion, I think. Sure. So that would be great if you want to just.
People can jump in. This is a small group, so if I say anything that people have questions about or want to comment on, just people should feel free to jump in. And I'm going to put this on my other screen so I can see you while I talk. So the first question was, why were talented and gifted services removed from special ed services and the laws that protect those students' rights? At the federal level, they were never part of special ed law. They never have been. And I suspect they likely never will be. The politics just doesn't line up at that level. In some states, gifted ed, advanced education is part of special education. That's few and far between, though. That's certainly not the case in Virginia, obviously. And, and there's a lot of debates in the field about whether that's a good thing or not. My own views on that have probably shifted over time. I used to think it necessarily wasn't a great idea, but now I think it probably would be a good idea. I'm hoping that in the next generation, educators are going to use technology to the point where it becomes somewhat moot, and that we'll be able to personalize learning so much better than we currently do. Not necessarily individualize learning. We tend to use those interchangeably. I don't think they're really the same thing. To really have personalized learning so that, every student's intellectual, emotional, social needs are being met in schools. So really kind of a response to intervention approach in some way, shape, or form. There's people within gifted ed, Scott Peters and others who have really worked on this. I think that's more likely to happen, where we kind of lose those designations in general before we actually see a parallel with special education. I'm just guessing there. Special education law is not a specialty of mine. I know just enough to be dangerous, but the second question, this gets more to the heart of the matter. how do you see the role of high quality instructional materials in advancing high quality education for all students? So we have a lot of research on this now, and the two things that probably are most likely to increase student learning, um, one is high quality curriculum. And I would say from a gifted education perspective, advanced education perspective, it's a high quality pre-differentiated curriculum. If you don't have that and you add that, the effect sizes in those studies tend to be relatively huge. The second would be ability grouping. And culturally, I don't know about everyone on the call, but when I was trained to be a teacher, and I don't want to date myself too much, but that was the late 80s and early 90s. I mean, I was taught ability grouping is bad. It hurts kids. It's bad for everybody. Well, 25 years later or so, the research says the exact opposite. It's amazing how just ability grouping has become such an ideologically loaded term, but it can be done flexibly. It can be done equitably in ways that really help lots of students. And we've got several studies that suggest that the group of students who benefit the most from ability grouping are students in the lowest performance quartile. And so those are two things that really seem to matter in John Hattie's research, and some other really large scale studies have found that. High quality curriculum and ability grouping really do have huge benefits. Now, you could talk to 100 curriculum experts and 100 grouping experts, and they would each give you 100 different definitions of what high quality curriculum is and what ability grouping is. So you have to be very careful. But speaking in general terms, moving to a high quality pre-differentiated curriculum tends to have a huge benefit for advanced students. Combine that with ability grouping, that's probably the best 1-2 punch you could have for spending resources in school to promote advanced achievement, especially among low income students, I suspect. And let me just run through the rest of these real quick, and then we can certainly circle back to all these topics as you would like. How do you suggest schools provide gifted ed while at the same time making sure the subset of students proportionally reflect the overall student population? I'm going to skip that one for a second. Number 4, is gifted education just another form of systemic racism? Tongue in cheek, he says, if you want it to be, sure, and if you don't want it to be, no. And I'm sure that we'll come back to that. So let me go back to number 3 then. How do you suggest schools provide gifted ed while still making sure the subset of students proportionally reflect the overall student population? I realize that for the vast majority of school districts, that is the goal. And that is a very important goal. In no way what I'm about to say do I mean to imply that that's not a critically important goal. That is not the overall goal for me. The overall goal for me is to wipe out excellence gaps. So making sure every student who needs those opportunities, who has the potential to benefit from them, gets those opportunities, that is an ethically, morally required thing, I think, for educators, communities to be focusing on. But even if your advanced student, your advanced program, advanced service population looks like the rest of your school district, that doesn't mean that you're closing excellence gaps. You may need to bring in other forms of support, for example, to help your low income students who, even when they get that opportunity, still need a little more support. That's a laudable goal, sort of equity in terms of participation, but it's equity in terms of outcomes that I think is our ultimate goal. I've had people argue with me, believe it or not, actually, after this dumpster fire of a year, you probably won't be surprised. But I have had people say, are you sure people of all races are equally smart? Get out of here. It's the 21st century. I'm so tired of these arguments. It's a 1950s argument. And what's the harm in assuming that everyone has the capacity, no matter what your skin color, zip code, who your parents are. So those arguments I have no tolerance for anymore. But I still hear them more than you would probably realize, which is just blows my mind. But so I think the most important things to do are, let me throw, I'm just going to rapid fire them out at you, and we can certainly come back to them. Making sure that you're providing opportunities is obvious. Making sure you're communicating the value of those opportunities. So not just sending a flyer home saying, hey, there's this thing that we're doing for advanced kids, but actually making sure that families understand what the value of that experience is. We're finding in some cases, interestingly, the more urban and the more rural the community, that people don't necessarily understand what the value of an opportunity is that you provide. So we just assume everyone comes at it from our middle class, upper middle class lens, right? Where we know any advanced opportunity is incredibly important for the success of our own children and for everyone else's children. We've learned you can't necessarily assume that. And I think that's really important. So make sure you're not just communicating about the opportunity, but communicating about the value of the opportunity. This is why this would be so great for your child to stay after school or whatever. And then the third piece of opportunity that we like to talk about is location of opportunities. Now, you're a fairly compact school division in a part of the country that has decent public transportation. In so many parts of this country, there is just no public transportation to speak of. And we just forget how many families don't have a car or don't have an easy way to get from point A to point B. So if you're creating advanced opportunities, if they're not during the school day where the student is, there may be no way for them to get back and forth to that opportunity to their home. And so where you place the opportunities becomes really, really important, which kind of leads me to one of these other questions in 1 minute. So you've got your opportunities, you're communicating to families about the value of those opportunities. You're doing what you can to get students into those opportunities, and you're placing those opportunities where it is by far the most convenient for those students to actually participate. We're finding that those are all necessary but not sufficient conditions. You've got to do those things. The second piece is identification. If you're going to be screening kids for these opportunities, you need to test everyone. You really need to universally screen. And I'm quite agnostic on what that looks like. I have colleagues who would sit here and give you a 2-hour workshop using different computer programs that they've developed on exactly how to universally screen. I could care less. Just as long as you're looking at data for every single child, with the best quality data that you can get your hands on, I think you've done a lot more than most people would do. And you're gonna find kids popping up that you wouldn't have otherwise found. And study after study after study tells us this. So universally screening is really important. More controversially, I think you should use local norms, which is rather than saying, okay, we're gonna look for any child who is in the 95th percentile or higher compared to their national peers. I get why we do it. I totally get why we do it. But the more I've thought about it and the more that I've worked with school districts who have moved away from that, it doesn't make a ton of sense. Because who cares how they compare to their national peers, right? It's, do they have needs that can't be met in the regular classroom? in their school. I don't care how they compare to a kid in California or Utah or Nebraska or Miami, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So my colleagues and I have become much bigger fans of using local norms. So especially if you have school division wide programs and you're sort of like screening students, again, universally screen. Everyone should be equally considered. That's really, really important. You will find specifically low income students that you otherwise wouldn't find. So it's a real big on-ramp for those students to get access to these services. And then the second is to use local norms. Who are the top students within each school, within each community, within the county or city, sorry, in your case. So those are two big things. I've talked about ability grouping before. We know that teacher training is really important, and we need to keep in mind that the vast majority of American K-12 teachers have no exposure to any content about advanced learning before they head into the classroom. They're just expected to figure it out. That puts a huge burden on school districts, where you have to provide the professional development to fill in those huge gaps. It's unthinkable now for us to prepare someone to work with our children who would have no special ed background whatsoever. But we do it with gifted ed every single day. And I think it used to be, I believe we had 6 states that required any coverage at all of advanced education, advanced students, in order for you to become a teacher. That was 4 years ago. The study that's about to come out nationally, I believe it's going to say that it's down to 4. That is a huge problem. So, making sure that all teachers at least have some sensitivity to the fact that you don't know what talent looks like. You don't know what an advanced student looks like. An advanced student looks like anybody. In that a lot of the assumptions that we tend to make are really stereotypes, and they have nothing to do with students' potential. And a big piece of this is a huge piece, and I run into this problem in every school district that I go to, confusing performance with potential. The goal of screening should be to find the students who have the potential to perform at very advanced levels. What do we need to get them there, regardless of where they're starting? The problem is that we tend to focus on performance. And if you're only looking at performance, you will never have equitable advanced programs. That's just not how things work. So it's really about potential. So for example, I went into a big city school district and I talked to this one principal, and he got excellence gaps. He totally understood it. He was a dynamic leader, really, really impressed me. And after an hour, I was like, all right, what are we going to do to start closing these excellence gaps in your school district? And he looked at me really puzzled and said, I don't have any bright kids. I just have low performing Black kids in all my schools. And I said, what? And he said, yeah, I don't have any gifted students. I'm never going to have gifted students in these schools. And it took us another 15 minutes of arguing about it before I realized he only believed that advanced students were students who performed at high levels. Potential just wasn't part of his conception of who could be advanced. That's a huge stumbling block that we have. And again, I'm going to blame people like myself. We don't do enough in teacher and principal superintendent training programs to really talk about these issues. So that's a really big piece. Teacher administrator training. We've gone into some districts lately where teachers got it. Parent groups got it. Some of the principals really seemed to understand the things that needed to be done to really turn this problem around. They seem to understand the difference between performance and potential, and how potential should always be the focus. And they seem to understand that it's going to be hard work, but this is actually fixable. Like, we can fix this now. And then I would talk to the associate superintendents and superintendent who were like, well, these kids really can't do that work, right? And maybe we should just forget about it and just use differentiation, et cetera, et cetera. And you just felt the enthusiasm in the room ebb away. So support of leadership is very, very important. And yeah, if your leaders clearly don't believe that it's important, then the hard work that's necessary to solve these problems, it's hard to expect all of your teachers to really rally behind it. So strong administrator support, strong leadership on these issues, combined with really good PD to help teachers fill in these gaps they have from when they went through their preparation programs. I mean, there's a million other interventions that people have been studying that help a little bit here and there. Those are kind of the big ones. One thing I've noticed within Virginia districts lately, which I think is really interesting, and it's not just Virginia districts, I see it in Baltimore too. It's this performance versus potential thing. When we talk about identifying a more representative group of students, the immediate response I often get is, but then some of those students aren't going to be able to handle our standard curriculum for these students. And my point is, my response is, yeah, of course. But the research pretty convincingly says that if you provide those students with the right support, they catch up amazingly quickly. When you give a student who has a lot of intellectual potential the opportunity to really be part of a challenging, rigorous curriculum, and you support them appropriately, in most studies, they catch up within 1 to 2 years to where the other advanced students are. We never thought the studies were going to find that it was that quick. But in most studies, it's 1 to 2 years, to the point that 2 years later, teachers can't tell you which student started behind. They just can't tell the difference anymore. So that's really, really promising research. And those are studies that did all the things that I just mentioned. So the last question on my list are, what are the downsides of not offering gifted education in schools? I'm going to broaden that to what are the downsides of not offering advanced education in schools? I'll tell you what my biggest concern is. And it is that upper income families and well-educated families will leave your school district. And they're going to go out because they have the social capital to do it. They're going to go out and find those opportunities for their children elsewhere. So who does that leave in your district if you're not offering advanced services? It's all these students who don't have that social capital, who would really benefit from advanced services. And so we are becoming very concerned that we're seeing, especially big urban districts, decide that, rather than do the things we know would help get us closer to equity in advanced education, that you should just wipe it out. Just, if you don't have advanced education, then there's no equity problem. And while I will grant you that that is a very American way to solve the problem, it doesn't solve the problem. I think it makes the problem infinitely worse, because a lot of families are going to make sure that their children do have those opportunities. Maybe it's an after-school program, maybe it's a summer program. Parents will do what they have to for their kids if they know how to do it and they have the resources to do it. So it just blows excellence gaps up even bigger. And the best example, and I'm going to pick on a specific example, is probably San Francisco. So San Francisco's gotten rid of most of their advanced math classes, especially into middle school. And they talk about how it's great because they have equity in all their math classes now. Well, they don't have any advanced classes, so of course they don't have an equity problem there. But what they never talk about is their student achievement in math has nosedived. And a lot of students, especially low-income students there, now can't get far enough to take things like calculus before they leave high school. that's a huge higher education STEM problem, workforce development problem for those students and their families. So totally cutting off their nose to spite their face. And so I think you have to have advanced education in some way, shape, or form within all public schools. I think every public school in the country should have advanced education. And if you're using local norms, you know that you've got advanced students there. So I do think that the let's just get rid of it to solve the problem attitude, I totally understand where that comes from. But I actually think in most cases, it actually makes the problem much worse. Actually, let me give you one more example. New York City. Man, does New York City have advanced education equity problems right now? Those selective high schools, you think that Thomas Jefferson's issues are bad? The selective high schools within New York City, they used to be, a generation ago, among the most diverse high schools in the entire country. Now they are among the least diverse schools in the entire country. It happened in one generation, but it wasn't an accident. What did they start doing? They started getting rid of ability grouping and advanced coursework in their middle schools. They stopped going. They used to have universal screening with local norms. They moved to testing only students who were nominated by their parents in kindergarten, like the exact opposite extreme. So within like 3 years, guess where all the gifted education programs in New York City, they used to have them all through the entire city that fed into these middle schools, that fed into these selective high schools. Within 3 years, almost all of the gifted education programs in New York City were in the Upper East and Upper West sides of Manhattan in their public schools. There was a brief period of about 5 years or so where there was not a single gifted ed program in an elementary school in New York City, in the Bronx, Brooklyn, or Queens. Each of them would be like one of the 15 biggest cities in the entire country. They did not have a single gifted program because they moved away from these principles. Now they're bringing them back because they realize that they've made a pretty big mistake. But it's going to take a number of years before they can get all these pieces back in place. But they are starting to finally correct them. So whenever someone from New York City says, how do we fix the problem? I just say, go back to what you used to do. Like, it worked. You were doing best practices in some cases before we had the research to back them up. Go back to those things and you'll be so much better off. So that was a long speech to get through these questions, but those are the 5 questions that you originally sent me to get us started today. And I'm happy to hear your reactions, answer any other questions you have, however you'd like to do it.
I would like to invite my committee. I'm sure they have some questions. So if you want to just unmute yourselves and have your question ready. Whoever jumps in. Lee, go ahead.
Sure. Hi, I'm Lee Dugan. I have a question about universal screening. We currently do universal screening in 1st grade and 3rd grade. Is that something? Is there another grade that you would recommend that we do universal screening if we were to make any shifts in universal screening? What happens, or would you make a recommendation for some later universal screening? Thank you.
Yeah, that's a very good question, Lee. And this is how I'm going to answer a lot of these questions, unfortunately. The part of the answer is, well, it depends, right? It depends what else you're doing. So if you have other entry points into advanced programs, like if you have teachers serving sort of as talent scouts, looking to see if there's students who have popped up, say in 2nd, 4th, 5th, 6th grade, whatever, and you're providing them with professional development. We've got like 30 years of high quality studies that show that teacher professional development usually has pretty lasting effects on how well teachers can start to see talent where they didn't see talent before. Then I say, no, you actually have some safety nets in place. first grade, it was funny. This just came up in another school district that may or may not be very, very close to yours, where they said, you know, we do it in second grade is when they first universally screen. Should we move it younger to kindergarten, or, you know, even just first grade? And several of my colleagues and I were asked this question by this district, and I was surprised. I thought there'd be more diversity of opinion. We all basically said no, that was a little too young. And here's my concern, even with universal screening, is that at first grade, I still think you're picking up socioeconomic effects, right? Who could get their kid into a good preschool program? Now, granted, a decade ago, it was much more severe because we didn't have as good access to pre-K services, and we still have a long way to go. I'm not saying that we're there yet. When we get there, I'll be much less concerned about this. So I'd much rather see, if you're going to do it at like grades 2 and 4. Still not perfect, but I think you're at least giving some of those lower income kids a chance to shine by the time that they get to second grade. Now, there's one program that I'm working with, and it's an urban district. We actually have been experimenting with letting kids self-nominate themselves into it. So there's no other nominations. We just universally screen using the data we have. So we're avoiding bias effects, parent advocacy effects. And about 2 years ago, we had 3 kids come to us and say, our friends are in those program. It looks pretty cool. And we were like, okay, well, it's going to be hard. Are you up for that? And they were like, sure. One of them did it for 5 minutes and said, oh, yeah, this is not for me. The other 2 became 2 of the best students. And so I think there are other ways within the Virginia laws, policies governing gifted ed that you can probably experiment. But to me, I mean, I'm making the administrators on the call nervous when I say things like, play around with it a little bit, experiment. They're going, oh, please, no one sue me, right? I totally get that. But at the same time, I think we have to be careful about that. So I don't think, I mean, ideally, I'd have you be giving formative assessments that are some sort of a universal screener all the time, all throughout the year, every year to kids. That's just not feasible. I totally understand. Doing it at least twice, but making sure there are other avenues into advanced services. So if a teacher comes to you and says, you know, I've got this student, recent immigrant family, she's a little bit behind, but boy, I really think there's a lot of potential here. I think that child should make it into the pool somehow. And I don't think saying, ugh, you just missed the first grade testing will get you in third grade. I think making sure you have those fail safes so that a student doesn't fall through that. 2 years waiting for a student in that situation is forever. You may have lost them. So it, as long as you're putting those fail safes in, and I have looked over your identification system. I can't remember the degree to which you have those mechanisms in place anymore, but making sure that you do, I think that's the most important thing. I mean, at the end of the day, Lee, the question is, are we finding all of our students who would benefit from advanced education? That really is the $6 million question here. If you can say, yeah, I think we're getting pretty close, then you're doing a really good job of that. And I would predict that population of students is going to look like your entire population of students. That's really what it comes down to in the end. That was a very long-winded answer to a very straightforward question, but it's complicated.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
We do have some folks non-committee and that are joining the call, and I did get one question. So the question is, do mentorship programs in the early grades help to identify and provide statistically significant support to historically underrepresented students who can keep up, say, until the third grade, but then because the disparity in opportunities, the gap widens in later grades?
Yeah, there's a couple different questions in there.
Yeah.
Let me roughly divide it into half, I think. So let me take the first part first. Do mentorship programs in the early grades help to identify and provide support to under students? The research says maybe. We know that what my colleagues and I call front-loading programs make a big difference for those students. And so front-loading would be, what's a good example? Oh, Fairfax County's Young Scholars Program.
Which we've adopted.
Yeah, great.
Here.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Perfect. Young Scholars programs are all about front-loading, finding those students who deserve the opportunities, but haven't had the right support, whatever, to get them ready to really take advantage of those opportunities. We really believe in front-loading. Mentorship programs like this, we don't have a ton of research on them. They can kind of be pseudo front-loading programs. If that's the purpose, then I think they could probably be beneficial. I don't see a lot of evidence for those programs related to actual student learning effects, though. So I don't want to go too far in my comment there, as I want to be a little cautious. But so, in the second part, they're going to be disparate.
Can I ask you a question? So are you saying that a program like Young Scholars, which we've adopted, that has a curriculum, teachers are trained, that does show that it can help the students?
Absolutely.
But just a regular mentorship type of program that doesn't, say, have a specific curriculum in those steps, not necessarily. I just want to be clear.
Exactly. That's
okay.
That's very well put. It in terms of if the outcome of interest is student learning.
Yeah, exactly.
I think you've got to be careful there. Yeah.
Okay.
There are maybe a lot of other outcomes that are valuable for a mentorship program. It just does not necessarily transfer into student learning gains.
Gotcha.
And it doesn't mean that those programs don't. It may just be that we don't have enough high quality research on those programs, and they're hard to study, to be frank. So that's why we don't have a lot. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the second part of the question, I guess we kind of answered it, but it excuse me. I would say I would put it this way. We have a few studies now that are longitudinal with really huge sample sizes. And what they find is that Black, Latinx, Native American student, low-income students, recent immigrant students in some cases, ELL students, even if they're performing at high levels by second or third grade, the odds decrease sharply that they'll still be performing at high levels by the time they get to middle school. And it's tempting to say it's regression to the mean, but it doesn't happen to the same degree for other student groups. So there's definitely, it could be outright discrimination and bias. It could be not having opportunities. It could be, good old-fashioned American racism. It could be lots of different things, classism. But that's my concern, is that even if we find some of these students, so like against the odds, they're fulfilling their potential at a young age and performing at high levels. And so you easily spot them with something like universal screening, right? And you go, wow, this is great. the odds are not good that in 4 or 5 years they're still going to be performing at that level compared to their peers from other groups. And so we know that part of this is a support issue too, and that's where those mentorship programs may really be able to help as you get older and you're dealing with identity issues and stereotype threat, et cetera, et cetera. Having a really strong mentor to help guide you on your way, whether it's a mentor outside of school, your teachers in the front of the room, it probably has some benefit. Probably has some benefit.
Committee, somebody else have a question?
I have a quick question. So when you're talking, I'm the student representative for this committee, and I just wanted to ask a little bit more about when you're talking about equity, and I think we've struggled a lot with the differences between equality and equity. And my question for you is, how do we design policies and procedures that promote equitable outcomes? So when you're talking about performance versus not ability, but performance versus potential, how do you recognize potential, and how do you create opportunities for students beyond just the universal screening and testing portions?
This is a fantastic question. We think that having a strong front-loading program really helps with that. So if you've got Young Scholars or a Young Scholars-like program in place, that's really important. But I mean, even within Fairfax County, we have found in doing some work there, if you know what Young Scholars is and you've got some training with it, it's an awesome experience for everyone involved. But we talked to a lot of classroom teachers who were like, what are you talking about? We're like, wait, no, you actually have the program in your school and they don't know what it is. So again, teacher training is such an important piece of this. Finding ways to make sure that teachers, when they see a flicker of potential, that in an upper income white student, they would go, ooh, that was really interesting. Maybe there's something there. Maybe the student needs to be challenged more. We have plenty of studies that provide evidence that teachers see that same thing happen, say, in a low-income Black student, and they just write it off. It's nothing. So again, just getting teachers to move through those implicit biases, to learn to recognize that potential. I think that is by far the most important thing. And I'm not an anti-testing person. Tests tell us something. What is it that Tracy Cross at William and Mary likes to say? Tests almost never have false positives. So if you do well on a test of any sort, you did well. Like there's no like fluke or luck to that. But if you don't do well, you can't make that many assumptions about why that happened. And so it could have been a million different things. It could have been inadequate preparation. It could have been lack of support. It could be test anxiety because you just haven't experienced tests before. It could be a million different things. So again, being careful not to read into the data, I think, is also part of it. Not every gifted student is going to pop up and do well on a test that you give. So, but I do think that focusing on front loading is really, really important. Because again, those programs generally have pretty big student effects within 2 to 3 years. Again, that really is amazing that it can help students that fast. If you've got it, great. Do you have it in every single elementary school?
As of this year.
That's awesome.
Yes.
That's awesome. This is a very odd year too. I mean, so give it some time, right?
Yeah.
But making sure it's in every school and that every teacher in that school knows what it is, even if they don't have a young scholar in their classroom, is very important. And I think Fairfax is kind of moving in that direction, which I think is a really positive direction. So I'm glad to hear that you're there ahead of them.
Yes.
I will rub it in their face for you when I talk to them. I was just talking to them yesterday. But.
I have a question.
Mhm.
Sure.
When you talk about ability grouping, is that based on potential or performance?
Both. And I'm a big proponent of flexible ability grouping. And so the way I saw one district do it, and I thought this was interesting, they only did it in math. They didn't do it in other content areas. And their math achievement was much better than their achievement in every other content area. When students came in every year, they pre-tested everybody on whatever they were about, to tackle. And then based on those performance levels, they put students in, I believe it was 4 different levels. But each level, again, had a really high quality regular curriculum that was pre-differentiated for that level. And then teachers at that level were trained to work with students specifically at that level to get them to the next level. But then here's where it became flexible. At least 6 times every year, they retested everybody again to see who was making progress, to see who really benefited when they got the opportunity. And what they found is that a lot of those kids who started in that bottom quartile, as soon as they got these rigorous opportunities, high quality curriculum, boom, they like jumped up a grade level. And they were like, wow, you actually need to be in the next level. Now, this isn't a utopia, right? Like not every kid is going to make it into the advanced level. But they actually found that providing the opportunity helped them figure out who the higher potential kids were. And they really were able to help those kids jump. This district actually said it turned them around in their state from one of the worst middle schools for math achievement to one of the best. And everyone talked about all these highfalutin reasons why they did it. I'll tell you exactly why they did it. Flexible ability grouping with high quality curriculum and good teacher training totally turned their school around. But this is, we talked about ideology before. The principal who told me that, I was in a meeting of the principals. It's a very big district. There are a bunch of principals in the room. And then they described their English program, English language arts, where they don't do any of that stuff. And their English performance has just slipped over time. And so I said, you ever have one of those moments where like before the word is even, the whole sentence is out of your mouth, you can tell from the reaction of everyone's eyes going wide that you have made a horrible, horrible mistake in what you were saying? I started to ask, why aren't you ability grouping in English like you are in math? And as soon as the word ability grouping came out of my mouth, the room went so icy cold on me. And the principal said, how could you say that? We would never ability group students. We would never do that. I said, but you're doing it in math and it's working spectacularly for you. You're closing excellence gaps. It's amazing. And they were like, we are not ability grouping. I could not get them to admit that what they were doing was grouping because the term can have such loaded meaning for people. And quite frankly, that's why I don't use the word gifted very, very often. It has a loaded cultural meaning to lots of people, and its bad reputation is well deserved. So I totally understand it. So I understand when you say the word gifted and people feel a shiver up and down their spine. Totally understand that. I don't think anyone is against advanced learning, and that's just why I use that term more often. But terms do matter. But
Yeah.
Again, I answered 6 other questions, Daphne, on top of your very straightforward question.
Well, here's just wanted to sort of add to that just to get some clarification. So we know that some students come into schools having been exposed to 30 million less words, haven't heard them. And so of course we know that that's going to have a huge impact on their academics because they lack that social capital. And so my concern with ability, and grouping is this, and I'm sorry, and you made a really good point in terms of, good teacher training. I think that's really important. My concern is that those students, if you do ability grouping, aren't exposed or being exposed to that rigorous, the rigorous curriculum or whatnot, because what I've seen working in the schools is that some of those students don't get the best of the best. And you've mentioned that
Absolutely.
the students are exposed to high rigorous, I think, a high quality curriculum, that you see that within 1 to 2 years or 2 to 3 years, they catch up, and just again, and I've seen, students who receive high quality instruction, I've seen IQ scores increase. And so I'm just a little,
yeah, no, I mean, I totally see where you're coming from, but I think that's why programs like Young Scholars are so important. And if you're a good sized district and you have a small front loading program, what I normally say to districts is you probably need to double or triple the size of this. I mean, there are a lot of students who have these needs, and again, you're trying to find those students who not only can do more, but have a hunger to do more, and they are out there. We just the problem is we don't often look for them. And so I think, I know, but this is another piece, and people get tripped up by this sometimes, I think, is that in districts that seem to be doing this well, and I do not have a long list for you, I'll tell you that right now, like everyone is really starting to struggle with this now, which is great, but that means we don't have 20 years worth of, success stories. But with the few that we have, the front loading almost always involves extra. And that to me makes sense, but it means kids staying after school to work on some of these things. It means some Saturday stuff. And these problems weren't created overnight for some of these students, and they need support. They need opportunity. Like, how do you make up those 30 million words? You're not going to do it just in school, right? And there has to be more. And so any time you can find ways to move beyond the limits of the school day, that's where you're going to start to see change happen. It's going to be really hard to do it if you're just confined to the school day, right? Because everyone is presumably learning. So it's really hard to get those kids caught up because everyone's moving ahead at the same time. It really does need to be extra. And then the other thing I would say about ability grouping, I totally agree with you that you see it in many ways and you go, why is the weakest teacher with the kids who need the most help? Why is their curriculum not nearly as rigorous as it is for the other levels? That's a problem that you really have to stay on top of. And that doesn't mean that the grouping doesn't work. It means that you're not doing the grouping right. That's a really important distinction that I think people missed in negative studies from like the late 80s and early 90s. Was they went into schools and found a lot of people doing it horribly and said grouping doesn't work. Well, bad grouping doesn't work. I mean, bad science education doesn't work. I'm a former elementary school science teacher. It doesn't mean we get rid of science education, right? We need to do it better. So, but here's why I think grouping is so important. The average classroom in this country, we believe, probably has at least 8 to 10 grade level equivalents of student performance level within those classes. So that's not potential, that's actual student performance. It can be 8 to 10. Some studies have found as much as 13 grade level equivalents in a late elementary school classroom. If you're not a math person, I can help you out here. 13 is all the grades. That's all of them. So you can imagine if you're a young teacher, you're so excited to get into that classroom, right? Have we taught you anything about differentiation in your teacher prep program? Probably not. And we send you in and you walk in and your principal says, hey, here's some data on your kids from the end of last year. Let's be conservative. You've got 8 grade levels of student math performance, maybe 9 or 10 grade levels of student reading performance. And your job is to get all these kids to learn moving forward. We wonder why young, talented teachers don't stay very long. Like, it is literally as difficult as we could possibly make teaching. Ability grouping, if nothing else, helps you narrow those bands a little bit. You still have to be able to differentiate. You still need access to a high quality curriculum. You still need additional training on how to work with those kids and get them all moving forward. It's just so much easier when you're looking at 3 to 4 grade levels and not 10. And then, yeah, extra. So young scholars, awesome. Anything you can do, any idea that you can come up with to strengthen your young scholars program even more, I can tell you right now, without you even telling me what your idea is, I'm going to say, that's awesome, do it immediately. We know those programs make a huge difference, but districts tend to underinvest in them. And so if you're going to do it, go for it. Go for it. It will pay huge, huge dividends. And I had a third point that I can't remember because I'm tired and they're eating dinner without me. I can hear them in the background. So we're going to blame it on my old brain. Let's just assume it was something funny and insightful. But.
Well, I think we're at 7:30, so I want to be respectful of your time. And I know I took a ton of notes, and I'm sure we will have a lot of opportunities to discuss this as a committee. I really can't thank you enough for all that you've provided to us. So
Sure.
I'll just invite real quickly, because we do have some of the administrators at central office on the phone. I just didn't know if either one of you wanted to pipe in before we sign off. I was going to allow you to do that, Dr. Mozingo or Dr. Mann.
Yes, I'll just pop in for a minute. I just want to say hello to everyone. And Jonathan, Dr. Plucker, it's just really good to see you again. And
It's good to see you too.
Yes, and really, I also took quite a few notes, so it's good to have you share some of your experiences, research, and best ideas. We have invested quite a bit in the Young Scholars Program, and it's good to know, as Laura indicated, it's in all of our schools, and there's a tremendous summer program, and I know that Tiana and Donna both have revised and updated the curriculum, so
great.
Hats off to them. But thank you so much, and I'm sure we'll touch base again, but thank you so much for these best practices and ideas.
Absolutely.
And I just wanted to say, Dr. Plucker, this is Gerald, man, just thank you again for coming for a second visit, the time you spent with us for the high school project and now this, and ditto to everything Dr. Mozingo said. And thank you, Laura, and the committee for setting this up.
Thank you all for having me. If you want to see good, high quality studies on all the stuff that I've talked about, just let me know, and I'll be happy to send them through. I'll just send them through you, Laura, if anyone has any questions. And like, I'm not going to send you 50 studies, but I'll send you the best 2 or 3 on each, so you can run from there. But lots of, and let me just leave you with this if I can. If we had this meeting 5-6 years ago, I would have said, man, this problem, how the hell are we going to solve this problem? How are we going to help these kids? And we would do a lot of commiserating, and it would be a dark, dark meeting. I had lots of those meetings. We have learned so much in the past 5 to 6 years. Just amazing large-scale studies. A school district's really going out of their way to try to experiment with things to actually see what works. I am fully convinced that I hope we all live another 30 years, let's say. I am convinced that in our lifetimes, we are going to solve this problem. Like, we now know how to fix this. This is no longer destiny. So it can get really depressing when you're looking at these statistics, implementing young scholars. That's not a light lift. That's really hard work. But you should be really optimistic, because for the first time in my entire career, the last 5 years, I've really come to see we actually are going to solve this. And I just think that's incredibly, incredibly energizing. So keep doing what you're doing. Keep pushing, pushing, pushing.
We will. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you, everybody. Have a good evening.
Committee, thank you. Those on the phone that joined us, thank you for chiming in. And we have a committee meeting next week for our regular business meeting. So I appreciate you guys giving your time tonight as well. Feel free to send me any emails or follow-up questions. Otherwise, I'll see you guys next week.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Hey, Dr. Mazingo.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Thank you. Good to see everyone. This was really good. Thank you, Laura, and everyone for organizing this. This was great.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Mazingo.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Dr. Mann.
Thanks, Dr. Mann. See you next week. Bye-bye.